नमस्कार and a warm welcome to all our viewers. आप लोग सब लोगों का बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। बजट की घोषणा हो गई है। The announcement of the Union Budget 2024 is already done. The Finance Minister's speech is over. But now, how do you analyze this? इसको समझें कैसे? And I don't think we can have a better person than the former FICCI president and chair of the ISC, a noted banker, chartered accountant, business executive, a very celebrated face, Naina Kidwai ji, who's now with us to decode the budget. Thank you very much, Naina ji, for giving us time on the red mic. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanket. Delighted to be with you, even though I'm not a chartered accountant, but I have analyzed this budget as much as one could in the short time that we've heard the finance minister.
Correct. Now, according to you, what are the key highlights of this budget which you felt were nice that this budget was able to address effectively?
I think one was the determination of the government to keep the fiscal deficit glide path very much in their sights, in fact, improve on it. The commitment to 4.9% and lowering it thereafter. At a time when they could have easily let that be, particularly in view of coalition politics and played to a much more populist gallery. So that very strong sense of responsibility and sticking the course is certainly to be lauded. I think the focus on MSMEs. MSMEs account for over a third of all industrial output and are huge employers compared to large industry. And we need to prop this MSME sector up because they have seen a lot of pain through COVID and demonetization. And this is coming through in many of the budgets, but now even more so in terms of financing, because what has been indicated is that there's a credit guarantee scheme, which means it takes some of the risk away for banks that are lending to the SMEs. There's a desire to give more business to SMEs through making sure that public sector banks provide some more credit therein. There's Mudra loans, which were at a 10 lakh level, are being increased to 20 lakhs for those that had repaid their loans. So, they are now more creditworthy. There's a reduction in the TREDS threshold for mandatory onboarding, which is down to 250 crores, which means there'll be 22 more central public sector enterprises, which will be on TREDS, and 7,000 more companies on the TREDS platform, which means there would be that many more business opportunities for MSMEs to bid for as they look to create business. And then industrial parks, one of the areas which FICCI had been pushing, and in fact, I've also written about, in PPP mode, where what you get is a wonderful plug-and-play environment, particularly helpful for MSMEs, because it means you can go into industrial parks which provide all the infrastructure, all the requirements, whether it's effluent control, energy, renewables, etc. And you are able to work without having to get multiple approvals with the ideal, in fact, I would say top-class infrastructure that helps in terms of your own logistics as a company. So there's a commitment for 12 new industrial parks, which have been sanctioned, and many such incentives for the MSME sector, which I think is very interesting. And the third area, which sees a lot of mention, is urban development, where the desire of the center to work with the states for creating redevelopment of cities, a transit-oriented development for towns with populations over 30 lakhs. So at long last, we are hearing about urban planning mainstreamed into a budget. And there's talk of investment of 10 lakh crore rupees to be made with central assistance of 2.2 lakh crores. So it's a center-state discussion therein. And water supply and sanitation, which is an area I work in, where there's been a huge success through the Swachh Bharat mission. And that, fortunately, not getting forgotten, because sometimes when you've succeeded, you move on to other things. And there is a budgetary increase of about 3% for Swachh Bharat rural and almost 100% increase for Swachh Bharat urban. So these are all very positive, including mention of water treatment, treated water being used for irrigation. So developing this infrastructure, water reuse, energy efficiency, these are all very futuristic, and it's frankly what I would have expected from a government that's looking at the next 4 to 5 years and looking long term and not worrying about that first year and creating a budget hoopla around this.
Naina Lalji, you see, obviously, one of the key highlights or concerns for individuals were whether their income tax lags are going to change or not. So we do see a correction there also. But while we get into that, we did see a lot of buzz around long-term capital gains tax and short-term capital gains tax being increased. Now, according to you, is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Look, I would not have liked to see capital gains tax fiddled with. I'm a strong proponent of the capital markets. I worked in it for years, and it is for the first time in my 40 years that I've seen such buoyancy, or indeed a position where domestic wealth, domestic funds are able to counter foreign institutional investments that happened. We were so open to the volatility of FIIs bringing money in and out that for the first time, even though money went out through the FIIs, pulling money away from India, we began to see the money that our domestic mutual funds have, our domestic savings and investments counter that. So anything that brings a negative feel to that, which is indeed what capital gains tax does, the richness of our IPO placements, etc., which is working well, worries me. It may not be much. I mean, it is, in fact, just there's also good news there in that the rate increases, yes, from 10 to 12 and a half. Indexation goes away, that's bad. But there is some, the time periods are being better aligned, where it's either 1 year or 2 years. It's 1 year if you hold the asset for more than 1 year, you are indeed in a zone where it gets treated as long-term capital gain, and otherwise it's short-term. So clarifications, clarity therein are also coming in. It's a mixed bag because there is some money that will go into personal hands because income tax slabs have changed. Tax rates are being rationalized somewhat there. Standard deduction is up. Net, if the individual, each person's tax will now depend, each one must be furiously working out their taxes on how much do they have in hand. But net, I would like to believe that the money that individuals are going to get in their hands from all of this is more than before, which should lead to a stronger consumption story so that heightened demand can then enforce better investment by the private sector in terms of capital to fulfill that demand. Because the truth is that many companies today are still at only 75% of capital utilization. So if CapEx is still not fully utilized, why would you put more money? And to put more money, you need demand to go up. And for demand to go up, you need consumption to go up. And to the extent that our farmers are going to do better, there is money going into rural schemes, and we are seeing, I hope, more money in the hands of individuals. That math I find hard to work out at this point. It then becomes a stronger consumption story, which is what we desperately need.
Ms. Kidwai, you see, one of the things that we saw in the build-up to the vote on account also that happened earlier this year during the budget was a lot of people doing some back calculation of the envelope and saying that it's a weird situation where you have individual income taxpayers being more or paying more tax than the corporate tax in this country. Now, you know, this is a subject matter of a huge debate. Should corporates pay more? Should they pay less? Should individual taxes be more, less? Where do you stand on all of this?
Well, I think where our economy can begin to now finally benefit from the enhanced revenue collections that we are seeing, primarily because of GST, and that's pulling more and more of the parallel economy into the system. and also, of course, benefiting from the general growth of the economy, we have the ability now to make India an attractive destination for those that look at the taxation as being unfavorable thus far. And India is seen as a high tax destination. And we have seen wealth leave this country. And we have not made it easy for all those asset managers and players in the financial services sector. There was an effort made earlier to get many of them to relocate, to manage the money in India from cities like Bombay. But the combination of poor urban living conditions and high taxation did not attract these individuals to come here. So they prefer to sit in Dubai and Singapore and manage the money from there. And that is a trend that we must continuously look to reverse, for which reduction in tax rates, I would almost say we need to compensate more than what these other countries do in terms of just tax rates to entice them here. I think would have a lot of benefit. And we're very far from that. But steps in the right direction would be in terms of reduction of those taxes and surcharges as they exist today on wealth. We did it for companies, you're right, drop that to the 25%, all with the desire to have companies conserve wealth so they will invest more. And that does indeed translate out. Because the issue then is, should government sequester the profit? And is government better placed to invest the money? Or would you rather leave it in the hands of a corporate and believe that they would be able to move more investment, more money, more returns? And I would bet on the latter. I think the corporates having the money in hand, seeing the growth we have in the country, redeploy that money, and that money helps in terms of growth of the economy.
Ms. Kidwai, let's now talk about specific sectors and how they stand to gain from this sort of budget outlook. The MSME sector, one of the largest employers in this country, a sector that bled because of COVID. Lots of efforts were taken post-COVID where you had loans being provided, incentives being provided. Do you feel this budget addresses the concerns of the MSME sector well?
I think it's a big step in the right direction because there's a lot of issues around what was seen as discrimination against MSEs by the finance and provision therein. And there have been many programs which have worked in that direction, but we've seen quite a big move now in this budget to push that. And at one level, it is the hand in aiding and assistance of the SIDBs of the world, where SIDB itself will be situated near MSME clusters, so they can help with some of this deployment of funds. But it's also in terms of enticing and helping the banks by reducing some of the risks that are seen with the SME and MSME sectors. So I think there is a lot happening right now. At the end of the day, it's not just about government incentives or indeed about the easier availability of finance. Ease of doing business, which cuts off across so many different criteria, needs attention so that the MSME can survive, can do what they do best, which is to manufacture goods and not have to worry about a lot of regulatory interface, etc. And this is not a journey which you can turn around at a budget, but the focus is very clear, and much lies at the state level. And I think the direction that the center sets then gets followed by the state, and incentives. This whole world of competitive federalism, which this government started, is very good because it makes states compete for investment. And in order to compete for investment, they have to provide an environment which is more akin to ease of doing business. They have to entice capital there. And in order to do that, handhold businesses, both big and small. And big investment is, while it isn't very employment intensive typically, does provide a huge supply chain of MSME, which can come from around the country. But if you look at many sectors like auto, the auto ancillary sectors grow around where the company is. So a state that attracts large industry is likely to see a bunch of MSMEs part of the supply chain of that big company coming up right there, very much like Maruti was for Gurgaon when it's set up. And I think we need more of those models as we go forward. The big company, but then that MSME cluster around it, which we will see in electronics, we're already seeing in auto ancillaries, etc.
Interesting. Now, since you talk about ancillary units, obviously all of this generates employment, and employment or unemployment has been a great buzzword even in the recent elections in 2024. I'm not going to ask you political questions, but Ms. Kidwai, my point is, do you feel this budget able to address issues like employment, skilled employment, urban employment, rural employment?
So at the urban level, and let's say, that would tend to be sort of more corporate, although we do have companies that are situated in sort of rural areas and spaces as well. Uh, the fact is that the skilling programs we have had in this country have been there forever, but there's a big push now for internship programs, much more like the German model, where you are educated, you study, but large industry creates a program where you come and intern. So you actually learn on the job, and then you go back and implement that, whether at that company itself, but at any rate, you're better trained so you can join another company. So the push on internship, skilling itself, and programs therein to be spent in a much more thoughtful way. We have spent money in the past on skilling programs. We had the big NSDC that got set up. But we could be very focused now on those industries which are big generators of jobs. And I'm thinking tourism, which got mentioned. So can we set up many more hospitality schools, nursing, then sectors which have moved forward quite well, finally, like toys, making toys in the country, leather, which we've usually done quite well in, apparels, textiles. These are high employment generating jobs, but they also need a lot of people. And we need to then be able to train people to come in and join therein. So we have to make it worthwhile for people to join, which means pay them better. We have to give them living conditions. So maybe some of the incentives and thoughts that have come through this budget on setting up dormitories and accommodation therein are going to help in that direction, which is the infrastructure for our workers. And of course, the skilling itself that enables industry to deploy the huge workforce that is out there and needing to be employed.
Ms. Kidwai, now we come to the very important question of facilitating the process of employment, where you offer incentives like a production-linked incentive, which will then create more production, thus result in more employment, and there actually being a need in a company to employ more people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes, and for the first time, maybe we are seeing in this budget, and I'm glad to see there's a bit of a fight between the opposition parties and the government as to whose idea it was, which tells me then it must be a good idea. And that is to have the government actually subsidize some of that employment, so that you're actually then encouraging employment, that the government will give some part, however small, in terms of the pension fund contribution or the provident fund contribution, which is one way of doing it. Then government may be picking up that first month's salary. So all of these are good intentions on the part of the government to encourage employment. I don't believe they're enough in that you won't suddenly see this rush of companies saying, I'm going to start an industry because I'm going to get an incentive. But for those that are already in there, and many companies were beginning to reverse their employment. So, packing lines, very disappointing, but packing lines which employ large numbers of people were getting done by robots rather than by people. So maybe we can reverse at least some of this trend, which was taking jobs away while we were mechanizing and wanting to insulate ourselves as corporates from the ups and downs and volatility of the market, because we do see people move off during harvesting season. We did see over COVID that there were jobs, but we couldn't get people. And companies, I think, just decided to de-risk their manufacturing models by not having to cope with the variability of labor availability, which is not great for the country. So I think we needed some of these steps to reverse that thinking that employing labor is high risk and high cost.
One such recent example is the Microsoft CrowdStrike fiasco. I mean, in India, you did have some airports, since they had a manual override or a manual system of writing tickets by hand. We were perhaps less affected as perhaps Europe. So I get what you're saying.
Well, I think, we are just more creative than Europe. We are just much better at issue resolution. And I think it's our great old system of jugaad, which helps in these situations. I mean, if you look at a crisis, you want an Indian there to be able to sort it out. The Western world was probably looking at much more direction from the top, and can we do this, can't we? And just not quick enough to resolve these issues. So yeah, I think that leads to what we can do best, which is more entrepreneurial skills that need developing, and more young and small industries coming up. In fact, one of the areas which was announced in the interim budget, which we haven't yet seen it play out, is the Innovation Fund, which was a very large commitment by government. And how it is going to be deployed and how it might encourage new industry will be good to watch. But it hasn't yet played out for us to know exactly how it will help. But the government's intent on seeing innovation, startups is very real. They have cause to celebrate that India's done well in the startup universe, although largely in the sort of IT services area. I would like to see much more innovation in things like delivery of water, sanitation, health services, education, in ways that we can deploy more people, but also bring greater comfort to everyone's lives and the way we exist, whether in our cities or villages.
My final question, Ms. Naina Kidwai, do you feel that there was a missed opportunity or potential for the future in this budget? Or have I put you in a spot of bother?
No, Sanket. I think that in every budget, we come into it with so many aspirations without having the responsibility of doing the math and cutting our coat according to the cloth. So we all dream big. So, I want fiscal discipline, but at the same time, I want the moon. So that balancing act is something which we have to leave to the experts, but it doesn't stop us from dreaming and wanting more and more. I think there was an expectation that we would see a little more thrust through the PLI schemes, which is at one level an indication that it's working, and that whichever industries we have sought through the PLI are beginning to feel that benefit, and therefore now a desire to get more and more in that area. So it doesn't mean it may not happen. It's not really linked to the budget. We could still see announcements in sectors. There was also, I think, an expectation that the much awaited FAME 3 would come through for EVs. And that again can still come. It doesn't have to be part of the budget, but it's just been waited for so long. This would have been a good opportunity to see that, because the whole EV policy has been hanging for the FAME 3, because as EVs go, they are still not profitable on their own, and that subsidization is important. And indeed, it was promised earlier, and we saw a bit of a mess there. So to bring the EV industry back to on its feet, to really see that build out in terms of what it means for us, in terms of environment, pollution, innovation, new jobs, would all be very good to have happen as we go forward. But I'm an eternal optimist, and I don't think any of this stops with the budget. So I will keep looking for these announcements over the course of the year.
Great. Lovely talking to you, Ms. Naina Kidwai. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanket.
Namaskar.
We'll catch up soon. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye now.